Okay, I'm going to be talking about Gloria Anzaldua's Toward a New Consciousness, and I don't know Spanish, so I can't pronounce anything correctly. So, sorry. It was written in 1987, and if you can't read Spanish, consider why she's writing in Spanish, whom she's writing for, and why she mixes English and Spanish together. This is a really hard essay to sort of summarize or talk about because it's written so beautifully. It reads so much like poetry that I'm not really sure where to start. Perhaps I'll start by talking about what she means by mestiza. As you know, and let me make sure I read it correctly, mestiza, from the translation sheet I sent you, means in Latin America, a woman of mixed race, especially when having indigenous and Spanish descent. And she's talking about herself, mestiza, which means mixture, as having indigenous roots, Spanish roots, Mexican roots, and white roots, and how all of these races or cultures are colliding inside her. And she's talking about that collision and what it could look like or produce. Okay. The first thing she says is that, well, she says a lot of things. The first thing I want to look at is on the top right-hand side of 1101. She says, all reaction is limited by and dependent on what it is reacting against, because the counterstance stems from a problem with authority, outer as well as inner. It's a step toward liberation from cultural domination, but it's not a way of life. And then she says at the bottom of that paragraph, the possibilities are numerous once we decide to act and not react. And what she's noticing, or rather arguing for, is finding a way to respond to all of the cultural divisions in some positive act instead of simply by resisting what's happening to her or her people, the mestiza. Okay. On the next page, she talks about something similar at the bottom of 1102. The paragraph that begins, the work of the mestiza consciousness is to break down the subject-object duality. Subject-object means I'm the subject and you're the object, or I'm the one who acts and you're the thing who's acted upon. And it's a common binary. And she wants to move past that binary in order to act instead of react. Break down the subject-object duality that keeps her a prisoner, and to show in the flesh and through the images in her work how duality is transcended. And then a few lines down, a massive uprooting of dualistic thinking in the individual and collective consciousness is the beginning of our long struggle, but one that could, in our best hopes, bring us to the end of rape, of violence, of war. Again, she's talking about getting rid of dualistic thinking, us, them, white, Chicana, and subject-object, and instead imagining a new race, a new consciousness. And when she says race, she doesn't even necessarily mean race in a very limited way, but race is like a people, a new people. Okay. Okay, let's move to, I guess, 1104. And she talks a lot about men here. and about how macho used to mean protecting and taking care of, and now it means something really different. Today's macho has doubts about his ability to feed and protect his family. His machismo is an adaptation to oppression and poverty and low self-esteem. And then at the bottom of that paragraph, it overlays a deep sense of racial shame. The loss of a sense of dignity and respect in him, in the macho, breeds a false machismo, which leads him to put down women and even to brutalize them. This is a lot for her to be suggesting. What she's saying is that the racial and cultural shame that mestizo men might feel is one of the reasons that they are so brutal to women. And she means brutal literally, in all the ways. And the fact that she's attributing it to racial and cultural barriers is, I don't want to say, it's certainly not excusing the men, but it's trying to explain how the violence done to these people is visited more heavily on the women by the men, but that it starts with, it doesn't start with, but that the violence that, maybe the violence that women suffer is suffered in part because the men suffer also. And then on the, where is it? And then she starts talking about gay men and about how she, especially as a woman, but also as a lesbian and as a mestiza, should embrace gay men as, and we recall she's talking and writing in 1985, 1987, that there's a natural alignment there, and that it's not just men, but that men have different, queer men have different sensibilities and alignments with women and with people of color or the, or with alterity. Okay. She says, very interestingly, I think, on the next page, halfway down on the left-hand side, that she says, I, for one, choose to use some of my energy to serve as mediator. And then at the beginning of the next paragraph, she says, we need to voice our needs. Opposite that, she says, the dominant white culture is killing us slowly with its ignorance. What she's doing here is calling upon the mestiza to voice their needs in this way that doesn't put, so white people need to listen and mestizas need to speak, so that it's not just, that it's incumbent upon her to tell people what she needs. Okay. I'm missing a comment. We'll get to it in class. Okay. She, on the next page, talks about how under the day of the Chicana, I am possessed by a vision that we Chicanas and Chicanos have taken back or uncovered our true faces, our dignity and self-respect. It is a validation vision. What she wants is for this mixture that she is to be validated as by the world, and not have to identify with any of the races that might, the races or cultures that a Chicana or a Chicano might have inherited or identify with. And then on the next page, she starts talking about the land, and she says twice on the right-hand side, of 107 borderland or borderlands. And in fact, this essay is taken from a book called Borderlands. And she's aligning her body, her culture, her queerness, her color with borderlands, being on the border or border between, and a border that she wants to disrupt. On the last page, she says, as a metaphor, she's talking about the seeds. And she says at the very end, they survive and grow, these, despite all the conditions, give fruit hundreds of times the size of the seed. We water them and hoe them. We harvest them. The vines dry, rot, are plowed under. Growth, death, decay, birth. The soil prepared again and again, impregnated, worked on, a constant changing of forms. And then the last Spanish, in Spanish, is rebirth of the Mother Earth. She's ending with this imagery in a way that allows us to see what actually becomes possible when we manifest some larger, when she can manifest some sort of pride, action, voice that allows all of her to speak and that will bear fruit. Here, literally, becoming 100 times the size of a seed. And that this goes through many births and rebirths and change. And that speaks again to the borderlands and how they change and survive different regimes, for example. I hope you love the essay. I hope you find it beautiful, and I'll see you in class.